In this video, I want to talk about levels in Capture One specifically. I want to show you how powerful is this tool and how you can use it in your day-to-day photo editing workflow. I'm gonna actually edit an entire image almost with only levels, and it's gonna be full of nuggets for everyone. I hope you enjoyed the video. But before we talk about levels, we need to understand histogram. If you're familiar with histogram, you can skip this part, but if you stay around, you will learn some secrets about histogram that I'm sure that you're gonna enjoy. So, what is histogram? According to Adobe, histogram is a graph that measures the brightness of an image by representing the frequency of each tone as a value on a bar chart. What does it mean? To make it simple, it's a graph, and it shows the brightness of your image. And we can judge the brightness of the image based on histogram. In digital pictures, each pixel has a brightness value between 0 to 255. If we are talking about the 8-bit image, of course. So for 8-bit image, 0 is black, 255 is pure white. And the values between these two are grays, different shade of grays. 128 is the value of the mid gray. So if I look at the histogram on this image, let me bring out the histogram to have a closer look at it. It's actually showing 4 graphs on top of each other. One is for the red channel, one is for the greens, one is for blue, and if you look closer, you might see a gray one hidden between these. That's the luminance, or just the value of brightness of the pixels. The histogram graph starts from the left, and the left side shows the amount of pixels they have the 0 value, or they are pure black. In this image, I don't have any. The horizontal axis is the brightness value. It starts from 0 to 1 or to 255. So 255 is pure white, and it's going to stand on the right side of the histogram. Left side is the blacks. If you divide this histogram chart by 3 or 4 zones, the first zone is, you can call them shadows. Then you get to the midtones, and the middle line here is actually the mid gray. And then you go to the highlights, the last zone, and finally you get to the whites. As you can see in this image, I don't have any pure whites because there is no bar or peak on the right edge of this histogram, and there is no pure black either, which is a good thing because we don't want to have pure blacks and pure whites in our images most of the time. Sometimes we do, especially when we take a picture. We like to keep all the data, because if we go beyond that, if we reach the whites, pure whites or pure black, then you don't have any data or any details in that shadow or bright areas anymore. They become just white or black. The vertical axis of a histogram is the amount of pixels they have the same value. In this picture, the histogram is more simple, and it's all shifted towards the right side. I don't have any blacks or midtones or shadows. We do. They are so little because I can see that there are some values here in this histogram, the shadow part of the histogram, but they are so little compared to the amount of white and highlights that we have in this image. Well, there is no pure white either, so this image is well exposed, and it's raw file, so there is no pure white, but it's overexposed because I wanted to have all the data in the snowy or frosty scene that I was photographing. In this little amount of pixel they have, the darkness are those shadow parts of the grass. So that's the more or less what histogram is all about. But let me share with you a secret about histogram. Not everyone really pay attention to histogram in this way. You can judge white balance and correct your white balance just by looking at histogram. This image is a good example. The histogram of this image shows that the blue channel are a little bit more toward right compared to green and red. What does it mean? It means that the image is a bit cold. And you can tell it from just looking at the image. When there are so many colors in the picture, it can be a little bit hard to judge it, but just looking at the image and say, okay, the white balance is off or on point. Now I close everything and just looking at the white balance and histogram in this image. If I move the Kelvin slider towards the yellows or warm up the image, you can see that these three different graphs of histogram, they are converging toward each other. They are now more and less sitting on top of each other. But if I look closely, if I try to move now the blue line is sitting on top of the green one, more or less. But you can tell that the red one is a little bit to the right. And by looking at the image, you feel that it is a little bit on the yellowish or reddish side, which is not quite nice for this image. To fix that, you can use the tint slider and move it towards greens. And now the green channel and the red channel are more or less on top of each other, but you can see that the blue channel moved toward left. That means that the image is too yellow now, because green plus red creates yellow colors, and the blue is way behind now. So we have gone too far on warming up this Kelvin slider, and I bring it back a little bit. Now these three colors in the histogram graph are sitting on top of each other more or less. As you can see now, the image is well balanced when it comes to white balance. But for this type of images, because it's cold image, it's ice and frost, I like to make it a little bit colder. So I'm gonna bring down the Kelvin slider and make the image a little bit colder. This is how I usually fix white balance when I'm in the editing suite. Now we know about histogram and how to use it and how to read it. Let's talk about levels. You see that we have 5 control points or 5 knobs to move. There are 2 pickers on the left and on the right. The numbers are the values, and they are representing the values that you have on these sliders. And as you can see, we see the histogram inside the tool as well. So if this is a histogram, that means that the left side is blacks and the right side is pure white, and the middle line here is mid-gray. The button sliders, they are the values you pick, the actual value of the pixels, and the top ones are target values. Let me show you. If I move this slider on the black side to the right, let me put this one back so we have more room to look at the image. That means the pixels, they had value of 70, now they become 0. Now, if I say that the pixel, they have value of 30 or 31, they become 31. Then there is no change in the image at all. I can reset the tool temporarily, and you can see there is no change in the image whatsoever. And this one to 0. And what if I move the top one? It's lifting up the black points. Any pixel they had the value of 0 before, now they have value of 66. Also, all these dark parts in the grass, they all become brighter, because when we move this one, the middle one stays between these two. This also moves towards the right, so midtones also becomes a little bit brighter. So let's reset this tool. The same is true for the right side. If I move the white slider to the left, I'm gonna tell the software that any pixel they have value of like 220 almost, they become pure white, become 255. And as a result, you can see the image becomes brighter. And these changes affects the histogram. So before and after this change, you can see how the histogram actually pulled towards the right side. If I go too much towards the right, then you see that now we have some pure white pixels that they are here. Let me reset it again, and this time we'll have a look at the middle one, the mid-gray slider. If I move it to the right, I get minus values. If I move it to the left, it gets positive values. The reason is if I move it to the right, I make the midtones that something that is a little bit in the highlight side becomes midtones. You see that this, I will tell that all the highlights, they become midtones. And by judging the histogram, you see that the histogram actually pulled over to the left. So that's actually a very interesting thing, because if I do this and in the same time I bring the white slider to brighten up the image, and again I'm gonna pull these two sliders close to each other, what is happening in histogram is actually I'm stretching the histogram. So if I look at the before, histogram was a little bit compressed in the highlights, and now it's actually stretched. And as a consequence of that, you see more details in the image because everything was in a bright side. They were very close values. Your eyes couldn't recognize the shapes quite well. You see that I brought out some more texture, more details in this image, especially in the highlights, because everything is images more or less it's highlights. So what we have done here is actually creating more contrast, but targeted the highlight values, and we brought out the details out of these bright pixels. Here is before, here is after, and if I zoom in, I clearly see that this beautiful frost on this grass was completely lost, and now they are more apparent, more visible. Let's reset it again. You can also use these two pickers that I mentioned before, and to pick the highlight value, you choose the right one and click on any of these uh, pixels that you want to become white. If I do the same for the blacks and I click on something like here, these pixels, they are become pure black. They had the value of 54, this picked up and they become pure black. Now we know the levels and how to use it. I'm gonna edit this image entirely, almost entirely with levels. It's gonna be interesting to see how can I use it actually in my editing workflow. Here is the image I took in Lofoten. It's a beautiful peak with very nice light, side light on the peak, and it has a lot of dimensionality and character. I like to emphasize that. I like to boost up the contrast in this image. So to do that, I'm gonna only use levels. But before I touch levels, I like to plot this image because I think that this image works better if it was like reading from left to right. That's at least how I like this image to look like. So I'm gonna go to my rotate and flip tool and flip it horizontally. By a glance at the histogram, you can tell that there is this image is exposed based on the highlights. So we have all the highlights and details. Not so many pure white pixels. Might be a few, but that's okay. The first thing I'm gonna do is create a new layer. field adjustment layer, and let's call it a level 1, because I'm going to apply levels in several steps to create the final look I want for this image. The first thing I'm going to do is to actually make the image a little bit darker by pulling the left slider and the level tools to the right. So some of these dark patches becomes a little bit more darker. Also, I have a lot of data again that they are in the highlights area. I want to separate them. I want to make more contrast in this image. So I'm going to push the middle or mid-gray slider in the level tools to the right. As a result, you can see all of these highlights on the shadow side of the mountain. They were highlights basically based on the histogram. Now they become more like midtones. That's good, but I want to push the contrast a little bit more in this image. I'm going to create a new field adjustment layer. Let's call this one levels 2. And in this new layer, again, I'm going to use the levels to push the middle slider a little bit more. And now we have a lot of details coming out of the sky as well. All these beautiful snow drifts that or blow-offs of snow on top of the mountains, they become more visible. But as a consequence, again, this image becomes a little bit too purple and too blue on the shadow side. I can reduce the saturation just a little bit. And then I think I'm gonna add another layer to just affect the colors and fix the colors in the end with the color grading. Here is before, all these adjustment with levels only, and here is after. How cool is that? I like to bring out more details in the sky, so I'm gonna create a new field adjustment layer, and we call it level 3. First, I'm gonna increase the contrast a little bit, also move the bright or white slider, and I'm not worried about the highlights that they are getting too white or too hot. I'm just looking at these areas that I want to create some contrast more to bring out more details in the sky. And I guess that's good. And then we target it with the Luma range first. I'm going to remove the highlights from this layer to not affect these. We can turn on the display mask to see what we are affecting. Everything is red now, is affected by the mask or by this layer. We also don't want to affect the dark sides too much. Maybe something like that. Make it the selection a little bit softer. So something like that, and that looks good. If I turn on and off this layer, this new layer, you can see how it affects the image, and I think it's over the top now. I'm gonna limit it to only this kind of brightness, and also increase the radius to not getting any weird halo or edge problems. Here's if I turn this layer on and off, you can see how this affects the details in the sky. It makes them a little bit too purple as well. So that's we can fix with the saturation, because wherever or however we increase the contrast, it affects the saturation. So we can counterbalance that with removing some of the saturation we added in this region now with the latest adjustment. So here is the before and here is after all of these changes. Now I like to adjust the colors a little bit, so I'm going to create a new field adjustment layer. And I go to, this time I'm going to use my color editor. I'm going to select these purplish highlights and desaturate them. Make sure that I have a big soft selection. And maybe move the hue a little bit towards yellow also. I think that's good. And then I'm gonna select the blue colors and desaturate them just a little bit as well. They become too saturated for my taste. Originally, I have edited this image with all other tools that are available in Capture One, and that the result of that edit is the one you can see on the left. And here is the new edit that I only used levels to edit this one. There are a little bit of difference, of course. I have edited with different mindset and with different tools. And I also used a gradient filter to darken down the bottom part of the mountain in this in the original edit, and added a little bit more vignette, and the image is a little bit softer in general. But as you can see, what I have done with just the levels is more or less on the same point as the other one, so it's not too far off from that. Uh, and that shows how powerful levels is. So I hope you guys learned something new from this video, and I hope that was helpful. If you like this type of content, please subscribe to the channel. I'm gonna create more videos about different tools in Capture One or Lightroom or Photoshop perhaps. As you know, I am a landscape photographer, so I'm gonna be out taking pictures, and I'm gonna share those moments with you as well in form of vlogs. So stay tuned for those videos, and hope to see you soon again in the next one. Until then, take care. Bye.